Good Friday, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update on tracking Isaias, now a Category 1 hurricane heading through the Bahamas, and we also have Invest 93L, a tropical wave, well out in the Atlantic, just off the coast of Africa. First, before we get going, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the like button, too, if you like what you see here. Hurricane season has a long ways to go. We'll be putting out a lot of videos here as necessary when there are storms to track. Isaias, as I mentioned, Category 1 hurricane, looking a little bit stronger here on the latest infrared satellite imagery. Winds right now, as of the 2 o'clock advisory, at 75 miles an hour, so just barely a Category 1 hurricane. But it did strengthen to our second hurricane of the season, and when we look at climatology, typically we see the first or the second hurricane, I should say, of the year on or around August 28th. So we're about a month ahead of schedule in terms of climatology when you look back at past seasons. Overall, broad picture of what's going on in the Atlantic Basin on the infrared satellite imagery, pretty active. We have several clusters and waves back behind Isaias right now that yesterday passed over the Dominican Republic and has now emerged in the southwest Atlantic, heading through Turks and Caicos and eventually up towards the Bahamas here in the next 12 to 24 hours before it sets its sights on the United States. On the imagery here, infrared, what we're looking at is the cloud top temperatures. The colder the cloud tops, the stronger the thunderstorm activity. So what we look for here are the whites and the black shadings indicating the extremely cold cloud tops and the strongest thunderstorm activity. You can see that clearly flaring on up here around the center, and that is a sign of an organizing and strengthening tropical system. When we switch up the imagery now and look at the visible satellite, you can see that it's showing that pretty good inflow at the surface and outflow aloft. It is ventilating properly, at least for the time being, before it runs into a few problems. It has an inflow channel down to the south and one to the north, and then outflow aloft. Looking pretty good there with some ventilation so far. Now, I want to show you the overall evolution of Isaias, because if you remember just a few days ago, we were talking about the immense size of this system. It spanned over 1,200 miles in diameter. And then as it tracked off towards the west-northwest, it started to contract overall. Now, how you can think about this is back when it was first evolving, when it had a very broad center of rotation. Think of a figure skater spinning in a circle with their arms out. They have a large rotation, right? It takes longer to complete one rotation. Then as they pull their arms in, they start to spin faster. That's called the conservation of angular momentum, and that's exactly what we saw here and why the storm eventually had a concentrated center, and now it's spinning faster, and it has strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane. You can really see it there on the evolution of satellite imagery. Right now, its diameter is about half the size it was just 4 days ago. About 570 miles here, roughly, on the satellite imagery here, when it was about 1,200 4 days ago. All right, so what are the factors in play here for it to either strengthen or weaken in the coming days? Well, against strengthening, we have a lot of dry air out there. The Saharan air layer is still causing issues for this system, and you'll see why on the imagery in a second. And we're also going to see an increase in overall wind shear, up to moderate to even moderately high wind shear that could disrupt the overall structure of the system in the coming days. For strengthening, though, you notice there's some more here that are for it to strengthen further. Extremely warm sea surface temperatures. Water in the southwest Atlantic and the water off the southeast coast of the United States, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. You need about 80 degrees Fahrenheit to sustain tropical development and growth. We certainly have that, no lack of it. On top of that, that warm water isn't just at the skin of the surface. It extends down to a depth. That ocean heat content is quite impressive. And it also is being aided by something called a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. I'm not going to get into exactly what that is, but it is a large region of rising air, and that helps to support thunderstorm activity. All right, let's start off with the dry air out there. We're looking at the water vapor imagery here on the satellite. Depicts moist air and dry air. Yellows and oranges are extremely dry air, low relative humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, and that is detrimental to a storm trying to sustain itself. If this gets entrained or sucked into the overall circulation, it's going to start to choke it off, and that may very well happen. Also, the increase in wind shear is forecast over the next 24 hours or so. Wind shear itself is a change in wind speed and direction with height. Tropical systems in general are vertical structures. The thunderstorm activity grows to a height. The colder the cloud tops, the stronger the storms are. But when you factor in wind shear, you get winds aloft that are blowing the tops off of those thunderstorms developing and kind of puts a suppression on what's going on with it trying to develop further. So the increase of wind shear could tilt the system and kind of weaken it a little bit in the coming day or two. So we'll watch that closely. But the warm sea surface temperatures are certainly there. 82, 83, 84, 85 degrees Fahrenheit in its first part of its track. And there's that ocean heat content there. The brighter colors of teals and oranges, meaning that that warm water extends down to a depth. As a storm system moves over the ocean, it kicks up the ocean, something called upwelling. And typically, if the warm water is only at the skin, it'll upwell cooler waters and it's eventually self-limiting. It'll run out of warm water to fuel itself. When you have the warm water extending down to a depth of several meters, several hundred meters in some cases, you have an endless supply. The upwelling will continuously replace the warm water with more warm water. And the forecast track right now does take it over the Gulf Stream along the southeast coastline, so that's an endless supply of very warm waters as well. Here's the latest forecast track. Again, like yesterday, we're going off the 11 a.m. forecast track with the 2 o'clock intermediate advisory. So the 2 o'clock let us know that it's still 75 miles per hour with gusts up to 90. The 11 o'clock track here, which will be updated at 5 o'clock, is still going off the morning model runs. So I will tell you, I am leaning towards the westernmost side of this forecast cone, and I'll show you the reason why with the latest models in just a second. But the cone right now still takes the median of all that right up the center, or right up off the coast of the southeast coast of Florida and the east coast, along the southeast coastline of the United States, and then potentially bringing it up on land, landfalling it somewhere around Wilmington. Keep in mind that cone of uncertainty here is very, very large, and for good reason. At this point in time in a forecast, the models tend to diverge a little bit, so this accounts for that uncertainty. Also keep in mind that the center of the storm only stays within the cone about 2/3 of the time. So there is a certain degree here of error that will occur within that time frame, that part of the forecast. Here's how it looks on the computer models, right? We're looking at all the different spaghetti plots. Each line's a different computer model. You'll notice that there is a significant amount of these models now that have leaned a little bit farther to the west, keeping it onshore through the state of Florida and then moving it north off the southeast coastline and into the Carolinas and eventually Virginia too. Yeah, there's still a significant amount of models too that are still east and offshore, but there's definitely a divergence from where they were yesterday. Let's consult now the GFS ensemble. This is the GFS model run 21 different times, 21 members, just changing the variables ever so slightly to see if we get a different outcome. Still pretty good agreement here, but even this model with all the ensemble members, some of those members are also leaning on that western side of that forecast envelope. And then they consolidate a little bit more and cluster as you head over the eastern part of North Carolina and southeastern Virginia and eventually up into the mid-Atlantic as we get towards early next week. Now let's compare the two major models, the GFS and the American. The red lines are going to be the European model. The yellow lines are the GFS. This is an isobar chart, lines of equal pressure. So the little circles, the bullseyes you can call them, are the centers of where each model thinks the center is. Okay, so here we go. Pretty good agreement here on the European and GFS all the way out to early Sunday morning, late Saturday night. We are running the European model here from this morning. I will tell you the afternoon model is certainly well off towards the west here, so keep that in mind. As we go farther out in time, still pretty good agreement here, but then there starts to be a divergence in the models in terms of timing. The GFS is much, much faster, shooting it off to the north and east. Meanwhile, the European's still here. Here we are at 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and it's still in the Carolinas, while the GFS is up into southern New England. So the timing, still an issue between these two models, at least on the morning runs. The agreement on the track is pretty much there, but we'll still likely see that change as we go forward here, as you'll see on that 5 o'clock update, probably seeing that track a little bit farther to the west. So the big question is, why is the track changing? What is steering this storm and causing the back and forth? Well, there's a lot going on, okay? The atmosphere acts like a fluid, and there's little kind of stipulations in it that can alter the overall track. A little nudge can go a long way. So what's going on here? We have the Bermuda High sitting over pretty much Bermuda in the central parts of the Atlantic, and that is driving this flow off towards the north. On the back end here, we have an incoming trough. So there's a weakness in this overall ridge here, and as you watch, as we play this out in time, we're going to watch Isaias travel off towards the north and eventually find that weakness and shoot up towards the north. Exactly timing things out when that trough arrives from the north and west and how weak that weakness is with the Bermuda High is really going to determine if it goes up and over Florida and over land, or if it stays offshore and straddles the U.S. coastline as it travels to the north. Those are things that will be ironed out as we get closer and closer. Right now, there's still a little bit too much uncertainty. So what's the percentage chances of seeing at least tropical storm force winds? Pretty much a guarantee through the Bahamas, and a good chunk of southeastern Florida will likely experience gusts of at least 40 miles per hour, straddling the coastline, even heading up through Jacksonville, Charleston, South Carolina, and through the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Those chances are around 40 to 50%. How about hurricane force winds, 75 miles per hour or greater? Much narrower air wind field for that, but still a good likelihood, at least 20-30% chance of southeastern Florida encountering at least 75 mile per hour winds. That'll all be dependent on its exact track. In terms of rainfall, another thing, highly dependent on where it tracks. The heaviest of the rain right now is consolidated to far eastern locations along the coastline, and that will likely happen either moving west with a farther inland track or moving a little bit closer to the shoreline and offshore if it tracks a little bit farther to the east. We'll finish things up today with other tropical waves that we'll be watching out there. Two other ones right now that have been highlighted from the National Hurricane Center. One tropical wave out here in the middle of the Atlantic has only a 20% chance of developing within the next 48 hours to 5 days. And another one, Invest 93L, that emerged off the coast of Africa about 2 days ago. Yesterday it was up to 50% chance. Now it's been downgraded to around 20% chance. I know we had a lot to talk about there, so if you have any questions, you can find me on social media. We'll have more videos throughout the weekend to keep you updated on any track changes or anything like that. Until then, enjoy your Friday and your weekend.